All right, is this thing on or what? I can't tell. Got my tablet so I can see comments. And it looks like I just might be live. But it's loading. Cool. Let me mute this so I don't get feedback. All right, welcome to my second AMA where I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try to show you everything that I have in my shop. I get lots and lots of questions about what tools do I have and some of my workflows and setups and things like that. So what I'm gonna be doing is going kind of station to station, showing all the things I have in my shop, and then if you have questions, just hit me in the live chat and then I'll try to answer them if I can. But it looks like we've only got a couple people here right now. So I'm gonna start by just doing some softball stuff. I went around the shop and just picked up a few of my favorite tools, or more tools that I think are very useful that maybe people don't know as much about. And I'm just gonna show a few of those just to let some people get in here before I go and look at the cooler stuff. So I'll start with the easiest. Wera Allen keys. I don't know why these are so good. I have probably 5 or 6 different brands of Allen keys. These can consistently take bolts out that other ones can't without stripping them. They're so good. They make them in Torx, metric, and for some reason the English SAE ones come in a pouch, which you can wear on your hip, I guess, and look cool. But these are really good. I have several sets of the metric, some upstairs, some down here. Really, really good. And more people should have them. I'm not sponsored by them. Another cool thing, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, it's a contour gauge. And they use these a lot in construction, so when you're placing tile, you can press it against, say, like a toilet, and then get the shape and then trace it onto a tile. But you can use them in metalworking and stuff like that as well. So if I have some, I don't really have a random thing around here. It's not the best example. But if I want to copy the side of this, come on, I want to go in. There we go. I can press this in and then I can go trace it on the metal and then plasma cut it by hand or saw it or whatever. Very useful, and only 20 bucks or so. And a lot of people don't seem to know about them. The third thing, if you do any precision stuff, mechanic stethoscope. People who work on cars know all about these because you can wear it and listen to a car and see if there's weird sounds with bearings and other things. But very useful if you have some linear stage or some system that seems like it's working right but is breaking or something like that. You can listen to it and you can often hear grinding or other weird sounds that you can't pick up with your ear. You just touch the metal probe to it and it works really well. All right, last one, just to give people a few more minutes to get in. You may or may not have seen these before. They're very cool. So this is a special screwdriver that has I believe a cam system inside of it. And if you pound it with a hammer, it'll convert the kinetic energy of the hammer into both a pressing motion on the screw and a twisting motion. So if you have some crazy tight bolt that's rusted that you need to break, this works really well. Because it's pounding it into the screw, it really helps prevent stripping. And it comes with Phillips head and other stuff, not just for hex nuts. Very useful. Well, not a lot of people know about it, in my experience. All right, so that is the start of the tools. I don't know if I'm getting any chat here. Has anyone posted chat? I'm not seeing anything on the iPad. Let me look at the phone real fast and see. Sorry about this. It's hard to answer questions if I don't have. Oh, got a test 1, 2, 3 on the phone. Thank you. Yeah, they're not showing up. Oh, there we go. Okay, it works. No one has anything to say. All right, let's go around and look at the stuff. Let me grab the camera. Sorry if this makes you sick I don't have my camera on a steady cam. So I guess the first thing we can look at is my turning setup. So this is a really, cutting off my head. There we go. This is a really small lathe. I got this when I was in an apartment, but I just haven't needed to upgrade to something bigger. I've had really large engine lathe in my list of things that I've wanted for years now, but almost always I can accomplish what I need on this or one of my mills. But it is super useful when you need to turn something. What I usually end up using this for is making screws and bolts. So if I need some special fastener with threads on the end or something like that, you can cut threads on this and turn stuff down. I use it a lot when I'm making spacers for bearings and stuff like that. You can do stuff really fast on this that you can theoretically do on a mill, but it's just a lot faster and easier. So really useful and wasn't very expensive. It was like $1,000, I think. And it's just a Grizzly. I've been happy with it. It came with, the only complaint I had really with it is that it came with grinding grit in the ways. I had to take it apart and clean it all down. They didn't clean it properly at the factory, but otherwise it was good. So I can't see anything on my phone. I'm gonna have to carry this around. All right, so if you have any questions about anything, just, even if it's something you see in the background or whatever, just let me know and I'll try to answer it. Otherwise, this is just general tooling. So a lot of people have shown cool pictures on Discord of their really nice tool storage. I'm kind of a simple guy. I basically have things that I turn in one drawer and then things that have handles that you squeeze together in another drawer. And then MISC drawers without a lot of stuff in them because I've migrated to specialty stations in this shop. That's about it for that. So this is my welding setup. And I only do TIG down here. And the reason for that is I don't want to burn the house down. I have a flux core welder, which is really crappy, but sometimes useful, but I don't do that down here. And this is a Vulcan. It's a Harbor Freight one. They don't actually make it anymore. As far as I understand, they got sued to oblivion by Lincoln Electric. It's basically a clone of the Lincoln Electric down to this little storage compartment for keys and stuff. So it works great. If you could still buy it, I would highly recommend it. I've used it for years. It's totally robust. It's fantastic. And the other welding thing I do down here is spot welding. You may have seen this on some of my videos. This is also a Harbor Freight. It's like maybe $150. It's a 240 volt. It can weld 3/16 thick steel, and this thing is fantastic, especially if you work with sheet metal. It's just so much faster to spot weld than it is to try to TIG weld sheet metal. You can do it with the TIG, but it's slow and you really can't get anywhere that isn't on an edge unless you cut holes to do plug welds. So if you plasma cut, bend, and then use this thing, you can just origami construct almost anything super fast and very inexpensive. And then the other cool thing you can do, if you've seen Dan Gilbert's videos, is you can make custom electrodes for more than just welding spots. For example, you can make an inverted cone tip to weld a ball bearing to a piece of sheet metal, which doesn't sound that useful, but it turns out it's pretty darn useful for positioning things and stuff like that. So pretty cool. And then I think I talked about it before. Over here we've got the jaw horse. It's basically a giant vise with reversible jaws, and you can clamp up to 4 feet in it. It's foot actuated, and then it has stirrups. So if you really are pulling on something, you can hold it down to the ground. Really great. I have 2 of these. Highly recommend. Fumes with the TIG. So the TIG doesn't generally make fumes unless you are welding stuff that has paint or oil on it. I have this here. So this is a eBay, I think maybe $100 surplus from a chemical lab. And it's just a fume vent thing, vent arm. I printed this on a Ender. It's just a whatever funnel, makes it wider. And you just position that over the weld. I only use that if I'm printing stuff that's stinky, but in general, stuff just doesn't stink. And then, oh, the other thing is if you're welding zinc plated stuff, which is just a bad idea. I do it, but I do that outside and very rarely. Okay. Going on. The giant drill press. This is very cheap. It's a Harbor Freight something or other, but the size is extremely useful. I have a smaller drill press that I use more frequently, but when you need to drill a hole in a huge thing, there's just really no other way to do it sometimes than just have a big one. And this is fantastic. It's also really nice having this big work area to set up stuff. So if you want to have fixturing or other stuff, it has T-slots, and it's really handy. And I've used the full size of it a few times. When I was making the press forms for the Crocs, I had to drill some long, straight holes to connect things together, and I had to use this for that. And I could have maybe built a jig for the drill or something, but it would have been a big hassle. So I like having this thing. The press. Use this in a few of my videos. Nothing really special about it. The one thing is I've upgraded it to pneumatic. So I have the compressor turned off right now because it's too loud when it runs, but basically you just pull a trigger and it goes down. All Harbor Freight. I think this is like $100. This is $150 with a coupon. Super useful. And the nice thing about these is that you can, let's see if I can pick it up. I can't, it's too heavy. I have a finger brake for it as well. So this is a Swagtech. There's a matching bottom piece that is too heavy for me to pick up both together. But if you need to bend 1/4-inch steel or even 3/8, you can do it with this and the press, which is really handy. And the plasma cutter can cut that thickness really easily as well. So if you need to make car parts or something, it's pretty straightforward. All right. I have a whole video about the 1100MX, so I don't know if anyone has any questions about it. Otherwise, I don't know, there's a whole lot that I haven't already said. Super useful. I use it really frequently. I guess one thing I haven't talked about, which is the ATC. So I keep it loaded with 6 standard tools. So spot drill, roughing end mill, finishing end mill, and then a ball end and a larger end mill. And then that's really handy because I have that tooling just set up in Fusion, and then I don't have to like worry about tool numbers and lengths. I can just set up the tool paths, come down here, pop a part in, and then go to town. And then one other really important upgrade if you do buy one of these and you use a probe. The probe that they recommend, you have to fish it through the enclosure to get it to the port for the probe, which is incredibly terrible to do every time you use the probe because you can't leave it in there. And so you can buy an extension. You can't really see it here, but basically it's a mini DIN connector. I have it extended, and then the plug is underneath the keyboard, so I can just plug it in right here and then probe. Very important and useful. All right, the knee mill. So people have asked about mills, manual mills on the channel a few times. This is a Precision Matthews, and it's a Taiwan made. So they have a few different places they source from. Their Taiwan mills tend to be higher quality. This thing is fantastic. I've had it for a few years and made a ton of parts on it. I guess one thing to note about it is it's not a full-size Bridgeport. I think they call it a 2/3. So it's a bit smaller, so you can fit it into a smaller space. The table's not quite as wide, which is fine for me. But the downside of that is that it's a little bit short. And so I had to build this base. This raises it up about 8 inches. And then that makes it the normal height for a Bridgeport. Because using this crank, you basically end up squatting down the whole time you're using the mill if you don't lift it up. So it's a great mill. I highly recommend it. And I use it all the time. Another question people ask me is why do I have a manual mill and a CNC mill? Basically the reason is that there's a ton of work that is so much faster to do on a manual mill. If I just have a part and I need to cut a slot in it or something like that, going and generating toolpaths on the computer, exporting them, indicating it on the CNC. It takes forever. I can just put the part in here, eyeball it, and cut the slot. It's great. And then sometimes you just do artisanal stuff where you don't want to make CAD. It's a one phase, it's a 240, but it's a continuously variable speed. And then I also have the X-Power feed, and then the Eason DRO, which is really good too. It's really handy. It has functions for cutting contours and lots of other math things that are really handy. And then to power all these things, what I do is I've got just a 50 amp 240 coming in. And then you can buy these, I think they're Siemens. Does it say? It doesn't have a brand. It's called a Talon, but I think it's made by Siemens. But it's a temporary breaker panel. And it comes wired with one 240 and two 110s, but you can rewire it. And then I have three 240s coming out of it for the welder and the two CNCs. Very handy and saves you a lot of money on wiring. It's easier than adding a bunch of breakers and running more 240 lines. I have two of these in the shop. And it plugs in. So at least in North Carolina, I don't think you have to get it inspected or have permits or anything like that, which is nice. Let's see. This is the CNC tool bench. All the tool holders and all that. These US General cabinets are fantastic. It's it's a Harbor Freight brand. If you read reviews online, they consistently rank better than the Home Depot brand. What is the brand? Husky? Yeah, Husky. I have some Husky stuff. It's way better than the Husky stuff. And super deep drawers, which is great. And so this is where I store all my collets and other tooling for the mill and metrology stuff. And those are good. And then these bins I use, these are called Shaler bins. You can buy them, they're just cheap bins, but they're really good for organizing drawers. So like the one area I actually have pretty good organization is in my tooling. So all my end mills and taps and all that stuff are in Shaler bins. And this is a Husky cart. It's way worse than the US General. The shop is a bit of a mess right now because I have everything moved down here because I'm building that backboard. So all my French cleat stuff had to get shifted here. I don't normally have tools where I can't reach them. But on the French cleat, very useful. I don't have nearly as many French cleat holders as I would like. I was putting it off until the day I got a CNC router, which has finally come. So I plan to make a bunch of different stuff. But the fact that I was able to move all my tools down the wall in about 15 minutes to make room for the basketball hoop is one of the huge advantages of French cleat. You can make all kinds of cool custom holders for stuff. For example, this is how I store my Prime Air tools. I just took the fittings for the airline, bored a hole through it, and then you have a super fast access to your air tools. But then it's on a French cleat, and I can just hang it on the wall. I can reposition it as I see fit. Very handy. By the way, this is a great tool. It's a pneumatic belt sander. It's useful when you're trying to clean up welds and stuff like that. And it's like $20 at Harbor Freight. And it works. A lot of people hate on Harbor Freight, but I've had really good luck with most of my Harbor Freight stuff. The key rule I've followed is I just don't buy anything there that has a cutting edge. So chisels and drill bits, bad idea. But almost anything with a motor has been fine. Some of it's kind of crappy, but I rarely have used it enough to break it. So I've been generally happy. This is my first CNC. And what it is it's an X2 size mill. So it's made by some random factory in China. There's a million different people who white label these. This is a Micromark mini mill. And it was pretty good. If you're thinking about building a CNC, I would highly recommend doing it. You're going to learn a ton. And I did this when I was in an apartment. And so I was able to do it. I did have access to a mill at work, which helped. But basically, this is where I learned all my CNC. I was trained on manual mills in school and learned a ton, very fun. It's got some cool upgrades like this power drawbar, which I've never talked about. I wish I had it wired up, but it's a neat design that uses an air cylinder and a wedge to generate around 2,000 pounds of force to open the drawbar. And then I was able to run it with full flood coolant in the apartment with this enclosure. If you're gonna get a CNC, I think you really want flood coolant. It's a huge pain, and a lot of people like the cool mist and other things, but with those you have to stand there and tend to the machine, because if chips build up, you'll break your tool. And flood is just much more reliable, especially for evacuating slots and things like that. So I wish I could use the misting systems, but I find the flood just to be way better. That's why I have it on the Tormach as well. Sorry if this is making you sick. So lots of French cleat crap. This is my bench of commonly used power tools. So grinders, belt sander, drill, mini bandsaw. Do I use the old CNC much at the new Tormach? Not as much as I used to. It's occasionally useful, but there's just no reason at this point. So I'm thinking about doing some other stuff with it. What I have used it for is a CNC platform. So I was messing with an experimental 3D printing technology, and I was able to use that to mount a head on and then print, which is very handy. That's the main reason I've kept it around, is that I've mounted a few things on it to use as a CNC platform, and it's great because it uses Mach and it's really easy to set up the tool paths for it. And if I need extra axes, you can even do that with the A, B, and C axis. So that's what it's mainly used for now. But I did use it for years. I think I got my money's worth out of it. I used it as a manual mill. I got it in 2011, I think. So I had it as a manual mill for years, and then I converted to CNC maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And so there's not much to say about this. The one interesting thing is that I have an entire bench dedicated to this. The reason I do is that I use these tools constantly when I'm building stuff. I'm over here using the belt sander, cutting parts, drilling, and having a dedicated area where you can just come over, do the task, and then go back to working without having to switch stuff around is a huge time saver. That's basically why I have so many stations, is that I want to do things quickly. And a lot of people say, wow, you build stuff fast. I think a big part of it is because I've optimized my workflow for speed. And I think I experienced not having this when I lived in the apartment. It was terrible. Having to get stuff out, put it down. It just took so long. So if you have the space and can fit stuff in, it's really worth the extra benches. They don't cost that much in the grand scheme of things. A couple tools here. So I've got 8-inch vise, really great. Very useful for bending with the finger brake that goes into it. Pretty cheap. They make them for 6-inch vices as well. I think even 4. If you do anything with sheet metal, very worthwhile buy. I have an old brake that I don't use as much now that I have the big brake, Arbor Press. And then down on the ground, this is a newer edition, which is extremely handy, which is a metal chop saw. So this is an Evolution brand, and I have the horizontal bandsaw and the little mini bandsaw, but when you're cutting bar stock, this takes 5 seconds, and it's super handy. I'm really happy with that purchase. I use it all the time. Let's see, this is the main work area. So this is actually a built table using these. I got them on Amazon. They're like $30 for a set of legs. Then you can build whatever size table you want on it. And the reason that I did that is it was really the only economical way to get a 4x8 work surface. And then I can have a sheet of plywood on top. So this surface gets beat up. I chisel on it. I try not to drill into it, but occasionally I do. You can see there's all kinds of spills. And it's great because you can just beat it up. And then when it gets destroyed, you just undo the screws and flip it over. And then you have a new work surface. And I find that for general assembly and work where you're doing just epoxying and stuff, really liberating because you don't have to worry about damaging your expensive workbench because it's not expensive and you can replace it. And then it's also handy because I have all of my commonly used power tools down here. I've settled on Milwaukee. All the major brands basically seem to be the same, but I like their stuff a little bit more. I like their lineup. If you look at the M12 and the M18 tools, they just have a bunch of really good tools, and they seem to be well reviewed. Not a lot else interesting down there. I have power on the bench, very useful. Then you can have a bunch of heaters and stuff plugged in. Let's see. This is my finger brake. So this will do a 52-inch bend in 16 gauge. And the way it works is you clamp it down with your foot and then bend up with this to whatever angle that you want. And it has removable fingers, which is extremely handy. You can do all kinds of complicated bends. So if you look at my almost working, I've got it umbilicaled to my computer now, but almost working basketball hoop. I have all of these complicated parts, and that bender allows me to do this stuff really fast because I can move the fingers and do bends where you just can't access with simple straight line benders because the flange will collide when I try to do this bend and so on. So I use that thing all the time. Unfortunately, you just can't bend thick gauge stuff without a huge heavy bender. If you look at some of the lighter ones, this is like 1,500 pounds or something. If you look at the 300-pound ones, they just can't go below 20 gauge. And it's interesting, when I bend 16 gauge, I see the entire thing deflecting, which is crazy because it's so stiff. But I guess the forces are just insane. This is my chemistry bench. So this one doesn't get used as much with the projects I've been doing lately, but this is more for learning than anything else. So I've been working through a couple chemistry textbooks and doing some of the experiments, doing things like extracting hydrogen from water and then trying to see the spectral lines, stuff like that. And it's just nice to have the space. Hopefully I'll get more into it as I learn more and get better at it. My goal is to hopefully be able to make some specialty adhesives and stuff like that for when I really need something that I can't get, but I don't yet know how to do that. So we'll see if I get there. Let's see, so getting into the storage. So I use these bins for smaller projects. As an example, this is all the extra parts from my golf club. And so I keep an archive of whatever's left over from every project that isn't trash. And I do this because I often end up going back to projects and either needing a part from them for something else, or I revive it and want to do a second generation. So this is the most compact way I've found to store smaller project parts where I can actually find them. And then just general more small part storage. So this is more, I don't have a wide enough angle. So I've got 4 of these. Let's see if I can get a better angle. That's about as good as I can get. I have 4 of these storage units, and then this is my bigger part and bigger project storage. So most of these bins have a QR code on them, and then the racks are also numbered. So I use an app called Sortly, and the way things are organized is the shelf number that they're on, and then the bin that they're in, and then the part. So that allows me to quickly figure out where the heck I put my 608 bearings or a random little wheel or whatever. It takes a little bit of work to put it in an inventory system, but I just have so many random parts that I just can't find them otherwise, and I save a lot of time by doing it this way. And then there's also categories of things. There's the pneumatics here, composites, films and adhesives, stuff like that. And it's kind of a work in progress. The bins work well, but I have, for example, an enormous amount of fasteners. I invested in kind of one of everything from Bolt Depot, which is a great place to buy from in the US, by the way, because I'm so sick of paying $1 per bolt at Home Depot. And they're just still, each box is the size. So this is 1/4 inch, M6, M5, M4, and so on. I need to organize these into cases. So on the stock side, I do like my setup here quite a bit. So I have, so you can't really see that. Get this light out of the way. So this is my cutoff storage. This is just a thing that I built. It's made of plywood. This is fantastic. I only track the high value stuff, so big pieces of bar stock. Otherwise, I just put the cutoffs in here and use them when I need to sort or hunt for a part. But this lets me store small to large, up to about 4.5 feet in length. And I just haven't really found another way to store such a range of lengths in a way that I can find them. They're not all stacked on top of each other. This thing's great. It took a few hours to make. I love it. And then I have vertical storage for full length bar stock. That's all tracked in an inventory system. And then smaller cutoffs are over here. Some of this is tracked, some of it isn't. The bins, each bin basically has a different category. So this one has small aluminum chunks. So basically anything that isn't bar form factor that could go into the cutoff organizer is in those bins. And then it's great because it's random in those bins. And the rough sorting, I have enough different chunks and steels and aluminum that I can just, and then sheet a little bit wider. I'm running out of space, but other than that, it's good. And then they're great. You can put all kinds of stuff in them besides wood, anything long. If you have a wall that's not being used and you got long stuff. Any questions? No. So this is my 3D printing setup. So Form 3 and cure, and I have a two-stage wash, so dirty and clean. Basically, you can almost saturate this IPA to wash off resin parts. It'll still remove most of the resin, and then you can have clean, which will remove the remainder and then get saturated much more slowly. And then basically when this one stops working, you switch them and then fill this one up again. And that works really well. If you have a single stage wash and you have an SLA printer, you're probably suffering a lot more than you need to. Even if you have just a bucket that you manually wash for stage 1, you really should have a 2-stage wash. Let's see. This is the random haul of crap. I don't talk about it much, but I'm also pretty avid. Maybe someday I'll talk about it, but I've done a couple really huge bike races across the country, which are really fun and interesting, but they don't really fit making stuff. So someday I'll find a way to talk about those. And then, so there's a cyclone separator on this side and then a huge canister filter. This is fantastic. If you ever used any of the kind of cheap ones that have a filter bag and then a plastic bag, the filter bag gets clogged up with wood dust immediately. So you're constantly banging, sucking, which is a huge pain when you're doing things like CNC routing where you just want to leave it cutting for a couple hours. So the cyclone separates out probably 98% of the stuff. All the dust in this bag that gets past the separator, I've never emptied this. This is probably like 15 of these bin drumfuls worth of stuff that made it past the cyclone separator. So it works really well. And if you do clog up the filter, you just pull this and that knocks the dust out of the filter. So really, really good. Not that expensive. Surprisingly inexpensive for what it is. It's only like twice the price of one of the cheap ones. And then up here I have an air dryer. So it's an Ingersoll Rand, which for some reason they delivered on a pallet. I guess everything from Ingersoll Rand comes on a pallet, which is pretty funny, but works great. That's for the plasma cutter. You need dry air. And then also for the CNCs in mills, you don't want to be blowing wet air at them. They'll rust because you get a little bit of water in the air. And so I dry the air for that as well so I don't rust my machines up. And then one upgrade that I did which I don't know if this is strictly legal, is wired to the main switch for the compressor. There's this cord coming out of it. I wired 120 volts across one phase of the 240, and it goes to one of the solenoid valves to drain the tank. So people often put these valves on the bottom of the air compressor, which will fire every hour or something like that, and that will let the moisture out so it doesn't build up and fill with water. But it's super annoying because you'll be working in the shop and this thing will just fire every hour, even if you're not using air. And so by wiring it to the control system, it automatically fires the valve whenever the compressor kicks in. That way you get the noise of the thing masked by the noise of the compressor, so it only happens when there's noise anyway, and then it's just not firing if you're not using it. So it's a nice upgrade. I recommend it. And then, so the woodworking tools, I don't really woodwork. I find that woodworking is sort of a thing that separates engineers, whether they like woodworking or not. I find that they're kind of different types of people. I mostly use the woodworking stuff to make jigs and fixtures. So the planer and the joiner are basically when I need specific size lumber that's flat to build fixtures. And there's nothing wrong with liking woodworking. It just seems to be a different personality type. I care about the result. I will gladly assemble my wood with metal brackets and stuff like that if it helps me get the thing I want. The dovetail, just, I get no joy out of that. So, but people who do, that's cool. But chop saw, very useful. This is one of the first tools that I got. You can make so many things with them. If you're in the market, I recommend compound sliding. The reason for that is that you can actually do more than just 2x4s and stuff. You can cut sheets because you have the sliding action. And so for a lot of plywood work, you can actually do it without breaking out the table saw, which is handy. The downside of the sliding is that they're very deep. So mine goes into the wall because I have exposed joists, and that's fine. But they actually make some that have, I don't remember what you would call it, but it's basically a collapsible stage, so it doesn't extend out the back when you have it collapsed. One of my friends has one of those and takes up less space. And then I guess the last thing, so I think everyone's seen the CNC router. Very handy. And being able to just throw a sheet of something in there and cut out whatever shape you want is great. There's a bunch of parts I made for the basketball hoop, spacers for the wall, and then the backboard is actually made of foam, and then I have fiberglass on it to strengthen it up. There's some pockets and stuff, so it's very handy to just cut that out very quickly. I don't really have a setup for this. I have the machine set up, and then I have a bench, which is covered with all the electronics for the backboard right now. But I think I'm getting to the point where I could actually devise a setup and have it set up usefully. But still useful. So that's kind of the shop. I think it's around 1,800 to 2,000 square feet. And I haven't outgrown it yet. I also have a 3-car garage. That's where the plasma cutter is. And we're not going to go up there right now. It's a bit of a mess right now. But I basically have one bay of the garage for the plasma cutter, and then I have another spot which theoretically could be used for my car, but I opted to fill it with tools and other stuff. And right now that's just messy stuff like painting and powder coating and stuff like that. So, does anyone have any questions? Let me fix my camera because it's angled and very annoying. And also, if you have questions that aren't related to the tools, you can ask those too. My wife says, refresh my screen. There are 2 questions. Okay. Thank you, wife. She's tuned in too if you have questions for her. Why don't I see the questions? All right, I see one question. How long have I lived here? I've lived here for 2 years. I moved down from Boston. Oh, she texted me the pictures, the picture of the questions. Okay, those are the ones that I saw. I guess the other thing that I haven't talked about is the setup I use for filming, which is maybe less interesting, but basically all that I use is camera on tripod. I talked about this one last time. This is an upgrade. And then I have 2 lights that are mounted permanently. So I just mounted a bar across the workbench because I was having such a terrible time hitting the lights with stuff when I was using the workbench that I just mounted them on the ceiling. And then if I'm not at the bench, I just put the camera on a tripod and I have a little battery operated light. That's all I have. Some people have really cool setups. Maybe someday I will, but I just don't have the time to worry about that. Do I have a dedicated electronics area? Yes. So my electronics area is up in my office, up on the 2nd floor, and it's a mess right now, so I'm not going to show it. Maybe I can post a picture in the channel, but basically I have a bench with a whatever you call the storage area above it, where you put your oscilloscopes and multimeters and power supplies and all of that. And it's just kind of a typical EE area for soldering and assembly. And then I also have, which works for me, I don't know if everyone likes this, but I have a drafting table too. So I was trained as a draftsman when I was in high school. It's pretty funny, actually. They did this thing when I was in high school where I was a certified draftsman, and they actually put a warranty on me where if someone hired me and I didn't deliver, the school would compensate them for their lost money, certifying that I was a good draftsman. But I really like drafting, and that's how I got into CAD. But having a drafting bench is pretty nice when you're trying to figure out things without being in CAD yet. I use the iPad more than I used to, but I still like drawing the old-fashioned way too. Have I thought about getting a high-speed camera? Yes, I have. So I have an offer from someone to let me use their high-speed camera, but that isn't a long-term solution. So I'm looking at getting a Chronos. They released the 2.0 or 2.1, I don't remember what number it is, but it's currently back ordered and very expensive. So I'm gonna get one probably, but just kind of waiting until the time is right when I have a project that really needs it. I'm making a second version of the Bat, and for that one I think I'll be taking this generous person up on their offer to use their high-speed camera. And then next time I'm thinking about doing a project that really needs high speed, then I'll bite the bullet and get the Chronos. Any other questions? Yeah, the Bat, it's really sad. Let me see if I have let me grab the Bat. Forgot I took the urethane springs out. But the crazy thing about this was that when I was examining this after firing it, there was evidence, basically the crossbar that butted up against the urethane springs that would basically damp the motion so that it wouldn't wreck everything. They were totally bottomed out. So they were going from maybe 1.5 inches down to less than 1/4 of an inch. And so I don't even know what that would look like. It's got to look insane. And then this thing also shoots out, and then it would shoot back in. You could feel it click, slam out, slam in when I would fire it. So definitely insane footage, and something I really regret not having, but I just don't have a camera. So I will be doing it again though, and I'll probably fire this one too, even if I make a V2. What I'm thinking about doing for the V2 is I want the whole end of the bat to move. So it's kind of cool that this one has the sweet spot. I liked that idea of a bat that just has a spot that's the sweetest sweet spot, and if you hit that, things go crazy. But I also like the idea of a bat where I can just kind of bunt and the ball goes shooting at the speed of light. That'd be pretty cool too. And so what I'm looking at doing is I have a kind of a 4-bar linkage design, all steel, pretty light, which will allow an aluminum end to just basically move 3 inches in or out. And then that'll be actuated with shells. So I need to do the detailed design on it. I've been focused on this basketball hoop, but I think it can work. And then I also will probably go to 4 shells, because why not? Like 3 is cool, but 4 is cooler. So that's the plan there. And then after that, I'm not really sure. I have a really long list of projects that I'd like to do. The Ironman gauntlet that flies to your hand is pretty high on my list. It's a really challenging project, which seems like a lot of fun. But I need to go through the list and kind of think through what I'm going to do. And the other thing I'm trying to do is have 2 things going at once, because I often get sidelined waiting for parts and stuff like that. So looks like someone on Discord has questions, but my phone, can someone like put the questions into here, because my phone is recording me, so I have no access to Discord. How do I control fluids? So the haircutting robot is a vacuum, so that was pretty straightforward. It's just a shop vac. For lab work and then for random like bleeding breaks and stuff like that, I have just a simple 2-stage vacuum pump, also Harbor Freight. I think it's like $100, but it works well enough for my purposes. So pretty handy when you need to pull a vacuum. I don't have a vacuum chamber. I need one. I just haven't had enough reason to get one yet. And then other than that, I don't really control too many fluids. I do on the mill. I added a hose to spray coolant. So basically, there's a garden hose, and so that I have a solenoid valve to turn on and off. That's maybe the only other fluid that I control. Yes, that's the one other coolant, or the one other fluid I control is the high pressure streams. It's just a pump. So there's a special kind of coolant pump which doesn't get destroyed when you fill it with metal chips, at least up to a certain limit. And that's what's in the tub that generates all the pumping and pressure. And then all the nozzles are 3D printed on that mill. And that's one of the really cool things about the SLA parts. Let's see if I have one over here. I do. It's convenient. So this is one of the coolant rings that I had for the mill. And so it's a 1-piece printed SLA part, has threads for the pipe fitting. And the cool thing about these is that they don't leak. So getting watertight parts with FDM is challenging, and it would also be really hard to get these fine nozzles and flow channels as well. You could maybe do it, but it might be hard. But they're all watertight, so building microfluidic stuff and nozzles and things like that is pretty easy. I've done quite a few different designs of this and other things, and it's one of the reasons I love SLA. Anything else? What is my general project workflow? For some reason, I'm not getting questions on the iPad that I have to get questions on. Sorry about that. I don't know why these technological things with streaming video and sharing files is so hard. So my general workflow, it usually starts with an idea. So as an example, the backboard that directs the balls into the hoop with the paraboloid shape, the basic idea was, could I do that? Like, wouldn't that be cool if you just had no matter how you throw at it, the ball goes in? And then the next question is that even possible at all? And so, for example, with the bat, same thing. I had the idea, could I use a charge to shoot a ball much further? It's a neat idea, but the idea is useless if it's not actually physically possible. So usually what I'm doing at the very beginning stage is trying to figure out feasibility with back of the envelope calculations. So for the bat, what I was doing is I was looking at how much energy is in a bullet that leaves a 22. I couldn't find energy for the Ramset powder loads. That's what the powder actuated nailers use. So I was using a 22 rifle muzzle energy of a bullet coming out to figure out how much energy is in it. And then using that to estimate if I put all that energy into a baseball, how fast would it go? How far could it go? If I put 2, 3, 4, etc. into a baseball, what could I achieve? And so just trying to get an idea of if it could work at all. And then for the basketball hoop, the big question was, does it only work from one spot? And so I was doing some basic math to try to figure out how much range I might have given the size of the ball and the size of the hoop. So it only works from one spot if the hoop is fixed size, or the same size as the ball. But if the hoop's bigger, you get a wider range. And so I was just trying to get a feel for that to see if it could work before I built anything. And then if I can convince myself that it has odds of working, then I will do more detailed design. And that usually starts with a good bit of thinking and drawing. So for this basketball hoop, I was pretty convinced. I looked at the power required to move the hoop around and what speeds I would need to move it to where I would need it to go in the time that I had. And I convinced myself that I had motors that could do that and it was possible. But then the big question is, how do you build that? And so I was thinking through all the different possibilities for gantries, and I was looking at using multiple cables. So there's ways of doing this with 2 cables and a weight, or 3 cables like a Delta Bot. And the big overarching concern was just general weight and then stiffness and the ability to get an extra degree of freedom for tilting the hoop, because the whole, I don't know if I've talked about this much in the channel, but the whole hoop can tilt as well. And so just iterating on ideas until I have something that I think is an architecture that could work. Sometimes I'll have to do CAD to see if stuff can fit, especially if it's compact. And then usually there's a tightly integrated CAD where I'm designing parts and then also doing some amount of calculations. So as an example, on the hoop, as I got into the design of the actuator, I have these V-wheels that keep the thing in place that are spring-loaded. I had to select a spring. I talked about this in the channel, but basically, what spring do I need to keep the wheel in the channel so it doesn't pop out? It's like one specific calculation to figure out. There's usually a bunch of those, or selecting belts, stuff like that. And I often will just CAD until I have a thing, and I don't care at all about the quality of the CAD. Usually it's a complete mess, but I'll figure out most of the dimensions and fit everything in, and then I'll throw that away, and then I'll re-CAD it with parts that are what I can make. And then that's the fastest way I've found to quickly get the shape and form factor out, and then without wasting much of time doing it nicely, and then getting a thing that I can actually make from that. The 2 steps is faster than 1 long step in my experience. And then I make it. So if there's code, I usually do that last unless I need code up front. So for the basketball hoop, I have some of the code I wrote before, but I haven't written any code other than some code to move the motors. And I wrote that yesterday. And typically the same is true for electrical stuff. If I need to order boards, I'll do that earlier, but if I don't, I just save that for the integration stage. I'll do it all at once. And then usually when I build, I run into problems and I need to do some redesign. So this hoop, I've had a couple issues with some of the pulleys and tensioning and other stuff, and basically I'm just ready to go back and redesign and make new parts as I need to. But I try to avoid those iterations if I can, because they add a lot of time. But that's kind of it. I don't know if that's very helpful, but basically start wide. What am I trying to do? What are the ways I can do that? Convince myself that those ways can actually work, do the detailed design, make it. You do not want to be changing anything about how your approach is when you're making it, because at that point you invalidate like 3 layers of work before it, and it adds so much time. That's what they always talk about in engineering management school. So it's kind of a similar process to what a lot of people follow for product development, and I think I picked up a good bit of that from developing products for a living, where you have 20 people, and if 20 people do work and then you invalidate their work, then it's unbelievably expensive. Oh no, I missed that question. Oh, do I manage multiple projects in parallel, or do I focus on one at a time? I generally focus on one at a time. I'm trying to manage 2 at once. The reason I do one is that I kind of get really into it and it's hard for me to switch gears. But the disadvantage of that is I'll often need a part or something which I don't have, and then I'm either waiting for it or I'm paying way more than I should for shipping, or using a crappier part than I should. So an example would be these belts actually is something that happened to me recently. So I could only get 10-meter belts for this basketball hoop that I'm building, but I need 20 meters, one 20-meter continuous belt. And I could not find it for less than like $500 anywhere, and any time scale that's reasonable. If I buy a 30-meter, it would come in October. So I had to figure out a way to splice the belts together, which I got them spliced, but it took so long to splice these stupid belts together. I had to do it like 9 times. I guess I learned a skill, but it's not a skill I want. So it's better if I have 2 projects, so I can just like order the belt, let that one simmer, and then focus on something else. Trying to think if there's any other questions that people have asked me. I guess I generally answer them in the channel when they come up. I'll give you all a couple more minutes if you have any other questions. If not, we can call it. How far are we in? Wow, 5. It's already been an hour. Time flies when you're talking to yourself, man. So hopefully this was interesting. As always, if you have questions, please ask them in the channel, and I'll grab a picture of my EE setup if anyone was interested. It's really not that great, but I'll post it in the channel since I didn't show it. And if you have other questions about my tools, please ask. Hopefully I can save someone a bad buying decision. I've had a few of those myself, and I'd feel good if I could help someone not have one of those. Oh, one more. Cool. You're welcome, Dabler. Can't remember your real name, but I know it. All right, well, let's end it here. Thanks for tuning in, and really thanks for the support. It helps me get a lot of these projects done. They do get very expensive, and also camera gear and other things. So this helps me keep going, and hopefully it'll help me build more cool things for your joy and entertainment and knowledge. So thanks for tuning in, and have a good whatever time zone you're in. Evening, morning, lunch. I guess if you're in Australia, good sleep, mate. And that's all I got. Farewell.